This week, we welcome Brad Thies, founder and president at Bar Advisory, to discuss how to use cybersecurity scorecards and KPIs to achieve your security goals. In the leadership and communication section, 7 uniquely personal bits of wisdom to improve your leadership, 4 key areas cybersecurity leaders should focus on, cybersecurity spending strategies in uncertain economic times, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 275, recorded August 29th, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Texas. Joining remotely are my co-hosts. First, welcome back, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt. Good to see you. It's great to be back. We were just talking about it in the pre-show. It's getting to be football season, baby.
It is.
Looking forward to the banter ahead of the show.
Monday morning quarterbacking from the 3 or 4 of us on the show.
That's right. That's right. We're really good at it.
Yes. And also joining again this week, because Ben is out, is Mr. Tyler Robinson. Welcome, Tyler.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here again.
Always a pleasure to have the Idaho contingency helping us hold down the fort. Security Weekly is proud to partner with HackRedCon for their first annual in-person event. HackRedCon is happening at the Hyatt Regency in Louisville, Kentucky from September 7th to 11th. As a part of our partnership, Security Weekly listeners receive a 10% discount on registration. Visit securityweekly.com/HackRedCon to register now. We hope to see you there. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. This segment is sponsored by Bar Advisory. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Bar Advisory. As founder and president of Bar Advisory, Brad Thies leads all aspects of the organization's global client service delivery and security assessment services, including SOC, ISO, PCI, NIST, and HIPAA examinations, FedRAMP reviews, and GRC consulting services. Brad is a recognized thought leader on security and compliance in the cloud computing space. He is a regular guest speaker at industry events such as ISACA conferences and is a member of the AICPA's Trust Integrity Task Force. Brad, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about scorecards, KPIs. It's a topic we've talked about often on this show. As Jason says, if you don't own risk management, you're going to report to the risk management officer as a security discipline. So it's always interesting to talk about this. We talk about it a lot, but it's not that easy. Like coming up with what you measure, how you report it, has been a long topic of conversation. I remember back when I worked for Tenable back in the day, having these conversations at Gartner, Security and Risk, for example. Why is this so hard? Why do we still have a problem?
Do we have too much data in the world? I feel like there's a challenge with data. We want to measure things, but then we have so much information that it's tough to really measure. And then, coupled with that, sometimes the CISOs of organizations, they tend to be the ones that are always the department of no. And I think we often lose sight of, there's a great quote, I can't remember who quoted it, but, a ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are for. And so we're looking as businesses to go out to sea here. And in order to feel comfortable going out to sea, we have to have really good data and good measurements to really understand where we're going. But if you don't link that to the business risk or the business objectives here, it's really hard to know where you're going. If we continue using that out to sea analogy, think if the captain, if the only place the captain looked at was underwater. You gotta look underwater, but there's an objective out there on the horizon that you got to go after. And there's just so much information that CISOs and
is that the same for complexities in the business? Do you think, not just data?
Well, complexity, sometimes we make life more complicated than it needs to be, and that's sometimes the challenge of having too much information to know what to look for. But I 100% agree with the complexities of it. It's always getting more complex.
One of the big challenges is that alignment of the data to the business objectives, right? Mm-hmm. I was talking about, when I was at Tenable, I presented on this, and I had actually mapped out a few of these. I used a few different frameworks, and I'm just curious whether this resonates in the work that some organizations really need to do. It's based on the goals and objectives of the business. What are the different areas that I need to measure? And that may then link into a set of controls, and then I can tie metrics to those controls, right? But I have to start at the top. Like maybe a goal for the organization is to reduce churn or to increase retention rates or something like that. Well, if that is a goal of the business and my data is being breached, that's not usually a good sign for data retention, right? Because you're creating reputational risk and damage. So then what are the appropriate controls I need to put in place to prevent a data breach, for example, and then associate metrics to that? Is that kind of the exercise that organizations need to start thinking about to align those, or is it more simple than that?
No, I think it's just that. I think maybe to simplify it more is starting with what do you want? So starting with that objective and what do you want? And so an example would be maybe you might have an internal objective at an organization that you have happy associates or happy employees. And so a lot of times as CISOs, we might measure how well do we do on responding to help desk tickets that might have a security impact. What about measuring how satisfied or how happy the associates are with that response? And so that's a business objective that ultimately you're wanting to satisfy the end user. That's what you want. And maybe the turnaround time or some kind of upstream scorecards that you can look at. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't tie out to a satisfaction of the end user, then it's not something really worth measuring. It's just noise at that point, as an example. That's one way of looking at it from a business objective standpoint. But I like where you're going with the standards and frameworks, because that helps keep people on speaking the same language, so we're not all over the board.
Yeah, and from the CISO's perspective, it's about understanding the outcomes that the business is trying to achieve, right? Because, take, for example, operational efficiencies. Tyler alluded to it earlier. The complexity of the business is there. We have visibility into processes that may not be adding value, that we can help with a security perspective, right? So it's not just about the technology and the shiny tool. It's about how we embrace digging into the business, learning the business, helping get those operational efficiencies by maybe helping streamline a process while securing that process at the same time, now we're adding business value. You know, we talk about it all the time on the show. One of the best friends a CISO can have is the CFO, right? Build a relationship with the CFO. Show how show the motivations and help the CFO achieve their outcomes. And now you're aligning to the business, because if the CFO has the ultimate seat at the table, right? They have the strategy, they have the voice of the board, they have the purse strings, right? So one of the things that I made sure I always did was have a great relationship with the CFO, learn what's motivating the organization, learn from that CFO how I can align my strategies to the business outcomes. Now we're all working, together for those outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And even with that, I think what you just mentioned there is that's the department within a company. So align it. The CFO might have good insights in the context of what's going on in the organization. Think about it across other departments. So if you've got a scorecard you're looking at, don't just think of it from the technology standpoint as a CISO. What processes do you actually own? You don't own the HR department, you don't own legal, but you need to be somebody that's thought of in the organization as being able to evaluate risk across the enterprise. And so you don't necessarily have to own those security scorecards within legal. Legal might have a scorecard around what's the percentage of contracts that haven't gone through a security due diligence review. They might have to own that because they're responsible for making sure that gets pushed across different processes. But it's up to you to make sure that as part of that scorecard, that it's represented across the organization across the different departments, because you don't necessarily own everything.
And Brad, influence that KPI or that scorecard, right? Because you're the subject matter expert in the room. So you can lend, take that consultative mentality. You can lend your expertise to say, hey, let's make sure we're building good, measurable KPIs. Because at the end of the day, you don't want KPIs that you can't measure, right? Because now you don't know if you're winning or losing the game. And they have to be achievable at the end of the day, right? I mean, ultimately, you want to be making progress over time. So you have to put KPIs that are measurable and achievable. If not, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
How do you get those KPIs? I was going to say, how do you get those KPIs in a form that is usable and accurate for people, right? People are not a metric, and that is one of the hard things to quantify is people and measure those correctly inside of an organization without adding additional stress and indicators that make people unhappy. So you're trying to get a measurement of their happiness, and by getting that measurement, you're causing unhappiness because of the extra stuff you're making them do now. So kind of how do you balance that and articulate that properly across a business?
Yeah, I think that's the other problem that needs to be solved. It's not just about the data, but starting with that accountability first. So, without having, we talk about the seven truths of a scorecard, and this really stems from we leverage EOS. If you guys have heard of the EOS model, and it's what measured gets done. Managing metrics saves time in the long run. So emphasize that. Scorecard gives you the pulse and daily to predict. Inspect what you expect. You've heard that before. And I think what's missed also is that you can have accountability in a culture that is high trust and healthy. And I think that kind of gets to your point is you've got to have a culture of high trust, that we're not doing this as a gotcha. We're doing this that maybe there's scorecards that you're developing over time that you've got to check in on. Maybe it's just not a mature scorecard yet. But we got to do something. We got to start measuring something so that we can take action on it and say, maybe let's drop it. But too often we put something down. The CISO says, hey, you need to be scored and measured in this, versus have an agency with it. And so that's that collaborative approach. Like, you need to be measured doing this. This is my perspective. What do you think? Why don't we test this out over a quarter, see how it goes? And if it's off track, great. We want to know if it's off track, versus, hey, if it's off track, it's on you. And so we want to have that culture of trust where people really feeling like they're held accountable. And that lends itself to the last point of these seven truths, is that only one person owns it. And so one person has to own each of these metrics. And that way, if you're measuring more than 5, and some organizations get up to 15, but you see some that are up to 100. If you've got more than 5 that you own, what's the adage? You're focused on everything, you're focused on nothing. And so start with just 5, and that's palatable, and just track that. Some of those might just be trials, and then others might be, okay, we're going to start tracking this, and then we can look back and go over time, but start somewhere. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, Tyler, but those are the 7 truths that we believe.
Yeah, and so this is where things get a little interesting, right? Assigning accountability to develop a set of metrics to report on. You can do it at too high a level or too low a level. So kind of where's that sweet spot, Brad? Like when you think about developing, identifying accountability to develop a set of metrics that people have to own, because only one person can own it. Is it the executive level? Is it a little deeper than that? I'm just curious where that right balance is, because that also will, I guess, identify the total number of metrics you're going to put into your scorecards.
Yeah, well, I think that's the executive's level's responsibility to have clarity in what those business objectives are. And so if it depends on where you're at with the organization. If you don't have anything, do a really good job at the leadership or executive type level and get your scorecard right. And so this might be the case for smaller companies. Get your scorecard right before you start even thinking about rolling it out to the rest of the company. Maybe larger companies, the enterprises that we work with, they just have tons of data and they just need more clarity to kind of align it to the business objective. But start with that executive level. Get your SHIT together before you expect others to start getting their act together. And then it starts to just cascade a little bit easier like that. But what we've seen success in is with the job descriptions. And so we've often asked our clients to look at your job description. Could be a little bit harder at bigger, like huge enterprises, but sometimes it starts with just one department. Look at your job description. What are their roles? What are they measured against to get their job done? Do you have at least one security measurable if it's relevant to that particular position? And that's a part of their job. And there's a difference between what's your job. Like if I'm a SOC analyst, maybe I'm looking at vulnerabilities. That's just part of their job. I wouldn't say that really rolls up to a scorecard. That's where the trust gets in. That's part of your job. And if you feel comfortable that these job description has these measurables into it, then you can start to really lean on the rest of your organization to just trust that they're doing their job. And then as a leadership or executive team, you're really focused on providing that clarity in the business objectives that really cascades down.
Yeah, we started talking about the human component a little bit. It's kind of what I work on every day in my day job now. And it's an interesting balance. What's been pretty evident is there are certain things they want to measure across an entire organization, right? How are you doing in security awareness and training? How are you doing with your phishing simulation program, right? There's like basic ones that everybody wants to get their arms around. But as soon as you get past some of those foundational ones, like how am I doing with my security awareness and training? How am I doing with my phishing simulation stuff? Then you get into a ton of potential different use cases. And so as a new CISO, or an organization that has not done this before, like what's next? Like what are those other metrics, those KPIs that they should start thinking about developing? Because I think this is the big challenge for a lot of organizations. Like where do I go next? Do I go down, a path around third parties? Do I go insider threat? Do I go credential work? Like there's so many different ways you could go. Like how do you guide a client through 0 to the first, set of metrics that you need to start tracking?
Yeah, and you mentioned what's next after foundational. If you're doing your foundational scorecard really well, you're ahead of 90% of the organizations out there. And that's where the complexity comes in, is when you try to do more than just the foundational, you might be doing too much. And so there's certainly more maturity you can have across those foundational metrics, but that's where it goes back to. I look first at, have you understood what are some of those key things at legal? What are the key things in finance, HR, vendor management? Those are kind of your administrative metrics. What are the operational metrics that you should care about? And this goes back to, work with these different teams across the board. So operational being security, IT operations. And then what are some of those governance type, metrics that you can care about? And so that's looking inside your company. That's saying, okay, let's check ourselves. Let's really look inside our company to see what they all care about, and it's up to the CISO to really help educate them on what they're seeing. And then I always recommend then checking that against some of the breach reports. Look at the Verizon breach report. It's the same. It's basically been the same report for the past 15 years. It's had the same information on it. And if you don't have a metric that looks at the percent of your systems that have high value data in it that you're not having MFA on, you're not doing your job as a CISO. That's something that has been on the Verizon Data Breach Report since the beginning of time, it seems like. And those are some of the foundational metrics that can link back to a business objective that then you can build upon from there. But get those foundational right before you continue.
All right, so that means nobody has their foundationals in place because we see the same data 15 years in a row on the Verizon breach report. So let's start with some of those. You mentioned a couple of them, right? Multi-factor authentication. Is that a foundational metric people should be tracking against? Identifying critical assets, right? Asset management 101, I still think is a huge gap for most organizations. Like, what systems do I have and what software do I have, and understanding not only what I have, but what's critical in order to make sure I'm applying the appropriate controls. Like, do we just go back to the CIS, top 10, 18, whatever number it is now, and just say, these are the basic ones I should be measuring against?
Well, those are the one you mentioned, the asset piece. That's got to be a metric. If you don't know what to secure, what you don't know, and it's that's where you have to work with your CFO on, because to get that list of assets in the first place. But it's not just the software or the IT assets. It's also your data inventory. So what's the data out there, so you can start to put a value behind these things, and that makes it an easier conversation when you start to want to qualify some of this. And so the MFA piece is important, but one of the foundations is just having a good asset inventory. So it could just be a percentage of how much integrity do you have with your assets. That's easier said than done, because I get that there's a lot that can go into that one metric. If you get that one metric right, everything else becomes a lot easier. And that's something that that could be a whole annual goal, to just get that one metric right, that you're got a good cadence on reporting.
Brad, we often talk about CISOs needing to speak the language of the business, right?
Yep.
So once I start talking, having conversations around asset management, it's very easy for CISOs to go down the path of, end of life, end of support, unpatched systems, things of that nature. Do we need to start making shifts toward having conversations around technical debt, the risk that it brings to the table, both fiscally and operationally? I always like to act on lead measures, right? So having KPIs in place that are lead measures are extremely important to me when I'm having conversations with the CFO, the CEO, the board of directors. And when I have conversations around using asset management as the example, it's what's coming down the pipeline, right? It's having conversations around lead measures. We're seeing our information, and we're going to have technical debt next year. So let's start investing this budget season for future state. Those are the KPIs I'm trying to build, is future state KPIs, to be ahead of the risk, to have that proactive conversation with leadership, so it's not reactive. Lead measures versus the reactive lag measures.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Jason. Those leading indicators help to predict the future. If your technical debt, you're always taking on more systems, and there should be some type of ability to monitor for what systems have been tracked and asseted or inventoried appropriately, and not. And I think that's one example of a leading indicator of what's to come. So if we're starting to slip on our percentage of assets inventory that aren't accurate, or haven't even been accounted for, or worse, don't even have an owner for it.
Yeah.
That's an indicator of the technical debt that you're speaking about to come.
And again, we're trying to build trust with the board of directors, the CFO, the CEO, right? We're trying to get that. We're fighting for that seat at the table. And every time we walk and sit down at the table, we bring reactive posture. That's not putting us in a good light, right? Yeah. So, I always try to, especially when I'm mentoring folks, try to look in the windshield as much as you possibly can and not the rearview mirror, right, for strategy. Granted, if you have to retroactively fix things, that's fine, right? You have to look back. But start positioning yourself to be a windshield, right? Looking through the windshield for your strategy. Stop the bleeding, then look through the windshield, because that's where you're going to be seen as a trusted advisor to the organization. I'm preventing risk in the future. Business risk.
Does that also mean saying no to initiatives and the next big buzzword that's coming up in the meeting? Like from a CISO standpoint, you may have directors pushing, your zero trust, or even coming down from the board, like being able to say that no because you're not in a maturity position for that technical debt in order to acquire it. Those have to be things that you have the political aptitude and political capital to be able to invest in.
Sure, and I 100% agree, Tyler. The only difference is I try as much as possible in my strategy to not say no, but to deliver a different outcome. I always say, listen, let me figure out what outcome you're trying to achieve, and and I equate it to driving. If we're going up Route 95 and there's an accident, let me take you up Route 295 because we may get there quicker because we're avoiding construction and we're avoiding the accidents and we're avoiding everything that's in our way. It may feel roundabout. It may feel like it's a longer journey, but I'm going to get you to that outcome in a different method, but I'm getting you to that outcome. I try to never say no. I try to get folks the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And if it takes meetings to drive underneath and really dig deep into what outcome they're trying to achieve, so be it. It's worth it because you're not the department of no, you're the department of delivering outcome.
Yes. Yeah. What is the innovative improv? Yes. And so you say, you say yes, zero trust model. Oh my gosh, that's the biggest, that's been around for a long time. It's just like cloud security. What's the cloud? What's the cloud? That's been around since the mainframe computers. It's nice though, because you appreciate, you say, yes, thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing zero trust up. We're going to look into it. We're going to your point, we got some issues to uncover. First, let's figure out where our crown jewels are at so that we know how to apply zero trust effectively.
And that's it. To your point, Brad, use the marketing jargon that's available to us today to achieve the outcome, right? I always wanted solar, but until Tesla was a conversation, my wife never wanted it, right? So I'm going to leverage Tesla as the brand and say, hey, let's start talking about solar. Maybe we never get a Tesla, maybe we get an electric vehicle, but now I have solar on my house, right? So I'm going to leverage the marketing in the jargon to get me to the outcome that I know we need to get to to where we need to be. So it's leverage it. Leverage it, use it to your advantage.
Yep. You're giving me some ideas, Jason, for my solar.
Yeah, because I don't know that the wind analogy works in this particular case, Jason.
No.
I don't know.
That's why I want solar, my friend. I want solar.
So I had a quick question for Jason, because when I think about asset inventory for a second, it's not one system. Like, this is a pretty complex problem. You've got to identify hardware, software, data, and human assets at a minimum. That's the minimum. Right? And the challenge is there's not really one authoritative source of record for all that. And so, just getting your arms around that is actually a pretty big project just to make that data right. Because if you don't know where those things are and where those gaps are, you don't even know how to start to produce a set of metrics around that data.
And that's where, the partnerships across the organization are extremely important, because now you have folks in every single business unit who can be your asset folks, right? They can be responsible for the assets within their business units and help you gather that and help you build your centralized asset management database in CMDB. And you're dead on. It's not just technology. It's not just software and data and systems and platforms. It's your people. It's your carriers. It's your vendors. Assets are a whole slew of things that present risk that we need to make sure we have tabs on. I treated my vendor contracts as an asset as a CISO because I needed to keep an eyeball on them. I needed to know what people were in what places at what times for what customers, so that way I knew there wasn't risk there, right? That's the mentality we need to have. Your carrier lines, your subscriptions, all of these things you have are potential risk, but they're assets to the organization. You have to keep an eyeball on it. That's the criticality of the relationship with every business unit, right? Now you can work with them and have someone responsible to have that tally, that inventory within their department. You can't do it yourself. It's impossible. No CISO, no security team, no IT team can do it by themselves. You need to go out there and build an army of folks.
And it helps you with accountability later, right? Because
100%.
now you can assign certain metrics to certain departments to get that alignment and accountability, which is where we kind of started this discussion, right, Brad?
That's right. Yeah, that is a great point. If you don't feel like you have your assets in order, all of the ones that you mentioned there, Jason, it's hard to have that educated risk conversation when the CFO is like, well, how much is it going to cost me, and how much is it going to save? You don't know until you've inventoried it. And so do yourself a favor as a CISO and get that right from the beginning, because it all really goes from there. And if you don't have it right, it's okay to say, yes, I hear you on that initiative. We're gonna put that on as maybe look into it next quarter, or the quarter after that, because we gotta hit this asset thing like nobody's business.
100%, Brad. And you want to know what? Don't be afraid to ask for help. Mm-hmm. You can say to the CFO, listen, this is something that's been on my roadmap for a while. I'm having a hard time engaging with this business unit and getting them to step in with me, and really get into that batter's box to hit a home run here. Can you help me? Can we have a conversation with the business unit leader? I need X amount of level of effort from a resource on their side to get this done. Yes,
I love that, because those are one of the three problems that we talked about at the beginning: too much data, not enough accountability, and just lack of trust. And an example that we had a client that we were working to help them with ISO, and we were pushing ISO into they adopted that as their standard, and it was a relatively big. I mean, they were Fortune 500 type company, and they were working for a while to get this implemented. And the person that was owning that, our metrics were, how well are we doing against this standard to make progress? It's more of a project-based metric. And it was like pulling teeth to get one person to get their to-dos done that they had to get done. And ultimately, that person got replaced by somebody else, and half of the to-dos that this new person came up with, she just said, I need some help here. And it turned out to be a 30-minute conversation with somebody on her team that got all of those to-dos done within a week after a year of trying to get this one person. And it was the fear of not asking for help. That's why that trust, that team health aspect of it is such an important part, to be able to say, if it's off track, it's okay. Say why it's off track, why you think it is. Maybe somebody else can help you out there.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. Now, I mean, I think I've mentioned it on the show before, but just from an execution strategy perspective, I've always followed the 4 disciplines of executions. Franklin Covey goes way back, but it really allows you to kind of break out of the whirlwind of the day-to-day, to keep the lights on and focus on executing on strategy, right? Mm-hmm. How do you feel about some level of a cadence? One of the 4 pillars is a cadence of accountability. Mm-hmm. Making sure that for your strategic items, those wildly important goals, right? Those really big things, you have a cadence. And I used to have team meetings to focus on those with the team, every week, in quick 15 minutes. Once we got really good at it, it was 15 minutes. What did we achieve this week to move the needle? What weren't we able to achieve this week to move the needle? What's coming up in the future? And where do I need help? Where do I need help was always a topic of the conversation, right? But it's all about moving the needle on those goals.
Always. And don't feel like you have to report out and kind of boast out, here's what I did last week. We care what you did, but we trust that you got your job done. Bring over the issues so that we can start to prioritize those things. And usually that's a weekly meeting, I think, within the department level, and bringing it up a level during the quarterly type longer meeting to go through some of those long-term issues like zero trust. Hey, we want to do some zero trust thing. I 100% agree with the good cadence.
Yeah, I mean, without a cadence, you get stuck in the whirlwind of the day-to-day. Everybody's just going to get focused on keeping the lights on and keeping, the gears spinning. You have to break out of the whirlwind, and honestly, fight for that time with your life, because you'll never get it back. Once you get rid of that calendar invite, it's going to get filled up with tactical stuff. So,
that's right.
Fight for that time with your life.
Cadence is important, not too often and not too far away. And we're going to get back on cadence. Brad, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Matt. And nice to be co-host with you, Tyler and Jason.
To learn how to craft your cybersecurity scorecard or to learn more about Bar Advisory, please visit securityweekly.com/Bar Advisory. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.